Hello, members of the DPE sorority. I'm incredibly excited to be able to share my speech today on the critical issue of US-Taiwan relations within the context of increasing US-China power competition. US support for Taiwan has waxed and waned throughout the course of history, depending largely on US strategic interests in Eastern Asia, and more specifically, the United States' relationship with China. I argue that today, Taiwan plays a critical role in overall US security strategy and should not fear being considered a bargaining chip in negotiations between the US and China. I will begin with a brief historical overview demonstrating how Taiwan has evolved into an important, democratic, though informal ally of the United States, and will then analyze how its current strategic position within the US-China relationship necessitates continued US support. Freedom House, an international measure of democracy, ranks Taiwan as among the freest nations of the world. However, it has not always been this way. Like many nations, Taiwan's path towards democracy has been a long and arduous process. In hopes of keeping this presentation succinct, I will begin my brief historical description in the year 1949, when the Kuomintang Nationalist Party of the governing Republic of China was forced to retreat from the mainland to the island of Formosa by the Chinese Communist Party forces during the Chinese Civil War. At that time in history, the United States strongly supported the Republic of China as a crucial part of its strategy to counterbalance the communist threat in East Asia, within the context of US-Soviet competition throughout the Cold War. Despite overwhelming evidence of the CCP's strength, the United States poured vast resources into supporting the ROC's leadership and war efforts. In order to justify the exorbitant amounts of money being spent on a seemingly futile mission, the United States routinely championed and paraded ROC leader Chiang Kai-shek and his wife in visits to the United States and performed numerous publicity stunts in order to increase domestic support for the cause. As time progressed, it became increasingly obvious that the KMT would not retake mainland China. When the KMT retreated to Taiwan, it didn't surrender or even cooperate with the Formosan natives. It didn't reconcile with the island's complex history and demographics. Instead, the KMT immediately asserted military rule over the island with strict authoritarian and Leninist fashion. Non-mainland residents were excluded from government, and opposition parties were strictly prohibited. In 1977, alleged ballot tampering led to riots throughout Taiwan. Despite its authoritarian rule, the KMT had promised to eventually return to a more democratic and representative governance following the war efforts. The following years revealed numerous corruption scandals among KMT government officials. As the war to retake the mainland remained futile, uprisings triggered concessions such as a push to place Taiwanese natives in government positions. Over time, similar concessions triggered further political openness, and particularly as resources devoted to war effort were diverted instead towards development, and Beijing demonstrated increased willingness to cooperate with the island, Taiwan underwent a democratization process true to the KMT's original promise. However grand these changes, they occurred too late. There was another seismic shift shaping the landscape of East Asia and US interests: the Sino-Soviet split. United States foreign policy experts hoped to work with China to drive a wedge throughout the Asian Communist bloc and weaken the Soviets. In 1979, the United States switched its diplomatic relations from Taipei to Beijing and gave notice that it intended to terminate its previous mutual defense treaty with Taiwan, which had guaranteed that the United States would come to Taiwan's aid if it were attacked by mainland China. In order to understand US-China-Taiwan relations, it is crucial to understand every involved party's one China stance, be it a policy or principle, alongside the foundational documents. The Taiwan Relations Act established the U.S.'s current strategically ambiguous approach to its commitment to Taiwan's defense. Subsequently, the three joint communiques, executive decrees with provisions regarding Taiwan, provided the basis for the U.S.-China policy. Following this legislation, the PRC argued that the United States had agreed that Taiwan is a part of China and adopted a position compatible with the PRC One China principle through this action. However, U.S. officials claimed that the U.S. One China policy did not directly endorse the PRC's One China principle, and instead acknowledged China's position that Taiwan is part of China, but did not commit to that being the official U.S. position. On one hand, the three assurances in the Taiwan Relations Act provided enough U.S. concessions of official support for Taiwan to allow China to allow official relations and closer cooperation between the U.S. and China. However, additional wording that led to a strategy of strategic ambiguity within the Taiwan Relations Act and additional qualifying assurances used ambiguous language that permitted informal cooperation between the U.S. and Taiwan. Aside from its status as a robust democracy, Taiwan is a critical strategic ally due to its geostrategic position and status as a critical component of the global supply chain independent from mainland China. Taiwan lies along the first island chain viewed as a critical aspect of U.S. military defense strategy and acts as an informal link within Japan-U.S. regional military strategy. Its positioning provides a critical buffer for China in the event of conflict and has historically acted as a launch point for foreign aggressors. Additionally, when critical concern between the U.S.-China economic relationship regards intellectual property protection. Xi Jinping's proposed shared future for humankind speech lambasted the liberal economic order's prioritization of intellectual property protection as hindering common progress. This is a valid argument in most cases. However, it's dangerous within the context of Chinese state capitalism because of government involvement in enterprises in China. A common pattern has emerged of China enticing foreign businesses to operate within their borders, learning their trade practices, and then establishing Chinese businesses that are able to market the same products at dramatically cut prices, crowding out any competition. China is able to sustain such low rates by subsidizing domestic businesses. These practices artificially alter the international free market system and endangers the current economic system. As evidence of these malpractices becomes more common knowledge, efforts have increased to divert the global supply chains, which were previously based in China, to elsewhere in the world. This is where Taiwan comes into play. Taiwan's position as a primary manufacturer of key intermediate goods and high technology, such as microchips, position it as a critical supply chain node and an asset in U.S. efforts to divert its global supply chain from China and its threatening economic practices, as evidenced between the recent negotiations between Taiwan's TSMC Manufacturing Corporation and its new plant in Arizona. Tensions rose between the U.S. and China throughout Trump's presidency, in part due to his administration's policy towards Taiwan. However, unlike much of the past administration's China policy, most often its actions regarding Taiwan were well regarded on both sides of the political spectrum as valid and worthy, and were supported and enforced through bipartisan legislation such as the Taipei Act. Not only is Taiwan a strategic asset, but it champions democracy and liberal values, particularly liberal economic values, and has demonstrated continued willingness to cooperate on international issues within international frameworks. Abandoning Taiwan to be absorbed into China similarly to Hong Kong is bilaterally an unattractive conclusion. It is uncertain if President Biden will uphold similar support for Taiwan as the Trump administration, as many has predicted that he will seek to work with China on a more collaborative basis. However, in an unprecedented act, President Biden invited the informal ambassador of Taiwan to his inauguration, leading me to believe, in regards to U.S.-Taiwan relationship, there's a hopeful future. Thank you.